Hello, it's Neil, coming to you again from Italy, and in this speech I am going to explain to you the importance that cryptology had in the Battle of Midway. Now, many people know about the Battle of Midway, the naval battle between the United States and Japanese navies in World War II, but many people may not know the importance that cryptology played in the United States being able to defeat the Japanese. Now, before Midway, the Japanese had a superior naval force. For one, it was only 6 months after they had completely decimated the United States Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor. And the other reason is because the Japanese were battle tested. They had been in the war for years fighting China and the other Pacific islands. The United States was not as battle tested. So Midway really marked the turning point in the war, really shifted, caused the Japanese from shift from a really aggressive, they can attack anyone, anywhere, at any time, to a real defensive posture. And one of the reasons that the United States was finally being able to break through and give them such a crushing defeat was cryptology. So, what is cryptology? Well, the Navy defines it as the continuous battle to keep one's information concealed and protected while at the same time expose and decipher the enemy's info. Basically what that means is it's the science behind keeping your radio communications scrambled and secret, undetectable to anyone but your own forces, and at the same time trying to intercept the enemy's secured communications or encrypted communications and trying to break the code to find out what they're trying to say. Now, crypto was pretty new at the time. Radio communications wasn't even that well established in World War II, let alone encrypting them. So it was new, and it wasn't really, people didn't know the value of it. They didn't even know if they could break these codes. But after months and months of trying to break the Japanese code, known as JN25, they were really making progress, and they had a lot of it broke. The problem is that they couldn't really get the proper nouns, like the Midway Islands or Hawaii, because they weren't used as often. So they intercepted a Japanese secure transmission that explained that the next target was going to be AF. And they did not know what AF was. There was a lot of analysts that thought that AF was most likely Midway. It seemed like the next logical target for the Japanese, but Nimitz was not going to be willing to devote his whole entire fleet to protect AF if he wasn't absolutely sure. So what Nimitz decided to do was use his own little deception. What he did is he sent a secure cable to the commanding officer at Midway and instructed him to send a message out unencrypted or in the clear that the freshwater plant, the way that the Midway Islands produce their own fresh water out of the seawater, was malfunctioning and that the Midway Islands were in desperate need of fresh water. So once that message went out, they listened. And sure enough, the Japanese sent out a secured communication stating that AF was out of water. So now we knew that AF meant Midway. And this was in the spring of 1942. So between the spring of 1942 and June 4th of 1942 to be exact, we monitored everything about the Japanese attack plan. We knew the forces, how they were going to set up, and we were able to use that against them. So in the morning of June 4th in 1942, when the Japanese approached the two small islands of Midway, thinking that they were going to have the element of surprise, just like they did in Hawaii, they were very wrong. They did not have the element of surprise. In fact, just about the entire Pacific Fleet, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, was waiting to ambush them. And knowing the Japanese attack plan, what they had is the Japanese always sent in their carriers the bomb via plane the islands, and they had the heavy guns, the destroyers, the cruisers hang back and wait for the other ships to come to the rescue so they can pound them. Now, since we had the drop on them this time, those ships that were waiting in the back for us to come to the rescue were useless because we were already there. Our planes at Midway were ready, manned, gunned, ready to go. We had 4 aircraft carriers, one of which the Yorktown they thought was destroyed, which with this new information we got from Ecology, Nimitz pushed around the clock and had it repaired in 72 hours. It wasn't repaired fully. It was only ready to go for about 4 or 5 days. But since we knew the date of the attack, we only needed 4 or 5 days. So what the Japanese instead ran into was a completely armed and ready United States carrier strike group. On June 5th, 24 hours after the start of the battle, Midway, Japanese had lost 3 out of their 4 carriers, sunk, completely gone, 6,000 dead. United States only lost 1 carrier. It was the most decisive victory in the Pacific, and it really was the turning point for Japan. It really had meant that Japan could not go on the offensive. They had to go on the defensive, and it really gave the United States time to let the industrial nation outproduce the Japanese. We pumped out more ships faster than they could, and since they couldn't be on the aggressive, eventually we had them very much outgunned. This also paved the way to cryptology becoming a permanent part of United States military strategy, and it is still used today. I actually did it for a few years. Anyway, I hope you learned something today about the Battle of Midway and the importance that cryptology played, and I hope you